Swami Srila Prabhupada, and also on this auspicious day of the appearance of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So very exciting. We have a special guest speaker this evening, His Holiness Romapada Swami. Before we get into that portion of the program, just a couple of quick announcements. The first is this Tuesday, we are honoring Bhadra Purnima. That's Tuesday, September 1st. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's a very special day where the gift of the Srimad Bhagavatam on this particular day in a particular way is granted the benediction of going back to spiritual world. So it's a fantastic opportunity to take advantage of this gift we've been given of Srila Prabhupada's books, as well as the generous act of giving this transcendental knowledge to others. So if you're not familiar with it, please check it out. It's featured on the ISKCON Chicago website, and it's this Tuesday. And there's also a special for anyone that wants to purchase or sponsor Srimad Bhagavatam set for $275. Also, a featured event. There's a full-day workshop called A Life Turned Upside Down. It's a one-day online and in-person retreat with Romapada Swami and others, and that takes place Saturday, September 5th from 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And registration is also available online. Finally, I'll turn it over to our speaker, His Holiness Romapada Swami, who's going to be talking about Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his life and contributions. And just a quick note for all those joining online, please submit your questions through the chat, either Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube. They will be monitored and asked in order at the end. Hare Krishna.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Madhava Kunjabi Hari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Jasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Braja Jana Jasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamanatira Vanam Jadi Jamanatira Vanam Jadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Ganar Brajajanaran Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachadi Jamunatira Vanachadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivijagacharya Astatarasata Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Gora Premanandi. You two young girls are very enthusiastic in kirtan. It's nice. Compliments to both of you. May you grow up and become nice kirtaniers. Okay. On our screen here we have some images of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I'll be describing something about his life. Just to put his life in context, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is the father of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master was named Bhakti Siddhanta. That's a title that was given to him. His birth name was Bimala Prasad. Bimala Prasad. Because in Jagannath Puri, that's where Bhakti Siddhanta was born, while Bhaktivinoda Thakur was chief magistrate in Puri. And as you know, the Indian system is beneath the king. The magistrate is not just he sits on a bench. He has a lot of authority. So he was chief magistrate, high court judge in Jagannath Puri. And he had prayed to Lord Jagannath that a ray of Vishnu would descend into this world to help this dark age of Kali become strengthened by bhakti. A ray of Vishnu to bring bhakti, and that was his son. So we're not going to speak about his son, we're going to speak about the father. A very celebrated and important personality in our disciplic succession. I'll say a number of things about him, and we can't say enough about him. So you see on his left thigh some books. One of his many contributions was he wrote many books. He wrote 100 books. Try writing a book. Try writing a few books. Try writing 100 books. And I'll read to you a little bit the daily schedule that he kept and get an understanding of how dedicated he was to not just be a prolific writer, but make bhakti available to the world. Because during his time is when the offset printing press just began. When he was a young man, it didn't exist. And when he was in his 30s, it started to happen. So he learned quickly because it meant being able to make bhakti texts available to the world. In addition to his own writings, 100 books, there were many translations from Sanskrit into other languages. Bengali was his mother tongue, but he spoke other languages, obviously. He was in Orissa, so he spoke Oriya, and English, and wrote in all those languages. So along in his right hand, you see our traditional bead bag, and he was engaged in regularly chanting many rounds every day. We'll describe a little bit as we go along. The reason the beard is there is because he had very strict vrata that he performed during the Chaturmasya period. And one of them was not shaving. Another one was eating once a day for 4 months. His son had even more severe, besides not shaving. The program, Bhaktisiddhanta's practice during Chaturmasya was once a day, he would not use a hand or spoon, but only his mouth, and would lean over and take khichdi that had no salt. Try taking khichdi that has no salt. And as much as you can eat before you sit back up again, so when you lean over, your stomach shrinks. And that was it. Once you sat up, that was it. Once a day, no salt for 4 months. Very austere. Bhaktisiddhanta was very austere. So he didn't do that one, but he ate once a day and observed other vows during Ekadasi day. That's why you sometimes will see some images. He has this full beard, and other times he doesn't. These are his deities. Whoops. We're used to, in ISKCON, worshiping Gaur-Nitai, and he worshipped Gaur Gadadhar. So Gadadhar is to our right, or Lord Chaitanya's left, just like Radharani is on that side. And it had to do with his particular mood of devotion. And Gaur-Nitai has another mood of devotion. And here's a little information about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, how he would dress to go to work in his position as a high court judge. And you'll notice perhaps in the central button, there's a pocket watch. No, watches weren't popular at his time, but he had one, and he used it. He used it very carefully. I'm going to read to you his daily schedule. This is how one of the ways he dressed while the high court judge in Puri. So this is his schedule written by one of his sons about his daily schedule. Between 7:30 and 8 p.m., he took rest. And then, so it was just 2 hours later, 10 o'clock p.m., he'd wake up. 2 hours sleep, maybe 2.5. It was night, so he lit his lamp, and then he began writing from 10 a.m. to 4 a.m. 10 p.m. to 4 p.m., 6 hours, with nobody calling you on the phone or sending you a text message, or none of the kids coming around. It was quiet time. And then if he needed, he would rest for half an hour from 4 to 4:30. Now, I think I would rest for more than 4 to 4:30 if I was up for 6 hours with 2.5 hours of rest, but not Bhaktivinoda. Then he would take his bath, and at 4:30 he would sit and chant japa until 7 a.m. He was very punctual. His pocket watch told him what time it was. And at 7 a.m., he took care of correspondence. He didn't have a computer and a typewriter and email. He just had correspondence. for half an hour. And then from 7:30 to 8:30, he read scriptures. 1 hour every day, writing for 6 hours at night. And then if there were visitors at 8:30, that's when he received visitors. If there were no visitors, then he'd go back to reading his scriptures until 9:30. Okay, now it's not breakfast time yet. For 20 minutes or so, he would go on the veranda of his house in Puri, pace up and down, and have a philosophical contemplation, sometimes debating people that had different ideas. He would speak aloud as if he was speaking to somebody. Bhaktisiddhanta had a similar practice. It wasn't rehearsing. It was just refreshing his mind about different views than his and what people would say and how would he respond to what different people would say. And address it not like in a confrontational, challenging mood, because that wasn't his style. His style was humble persuasion. That was his style. And so then at 9:30, if he needed, then another 15-minute nap. And if you try to lie down for 15 minutes and what happens? Yeah. But, I don't know if his pocket watch had an alarm on it or something, but 15 minutes, and he was very regulated. And then at 9:45, he'd have his breakfast, and his breakfast consisted of a half quart of milk, 2 chapatis, and some fruit, and 10-minute breakfast. And at 9:55 a.m., he put on his little uniform, his court garb, and off he went by carriage to the court. And he would regularly wear large strand of necklace, another interesting fancy hat, and his, his costume, his fashion of the time. And then showing his visibly 6 strands of large neck beads, and he would go to the court, and he had a shaved head every month and tilak on the high court bench. And they didn't understand the Englishmen who were in charge of things watched him work, and they couldn't understand how he did what he did. He would hear between 30 and 50 cases every day. Between 30 and 50 cases every day. So from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, then he took a little break. Normally, what it says here, this is in his biography, what took others 1/2 hour, he finished in 5 minutes. He took another 2 minutes to write his judgment in detail. Wouldn't it be nice if the court system was swift like that? It's not like that, is it? Certainly not in India. At 1 o'clock, he went by carriage back to his home, freshened up, and at 2 to 5, he's back at the courtroom, and at 5 o'clock he left, and when he reached his home after that, he did some further translation of Sanskrit writings by dictating to a secretary. He would read and his secretary would take notes. Then he had his evening bath, evening meal. It doesn't say what he had for lunch. It doesn't indicate anything, so apparently he didn't eat anything. And his evening meal was a little rice, 2 chapatis, and a half quart of milk. And then, so he's back at home at 5, took a bath, change of clothes, little meal, some time with the kids, 7:30 taking rest, or 8 o'clock and up at 10 o'clock. And he just kept that schedule, very intense schedule. And along with this, look at his family. He had 10 children. His wife is to his left, Bhagavati Devi, and the upper row to the our far left, or his right, that's Bhaktisiddhanta. Before he was Bhaktisiddhanta, Bimal Prasad. So that's a fantastic contribution. He maintained a family of 10, and one of those 10 became a pure devotee. That's a life's work in itself. Here's that same, for a similar photo, not the same. And here's a close-up seeing his facial features. He was very strong in his sadhana practices. This is now, during a portion of his life, he entered into solitary bhajan. He wanted to retire at a certain stage from the active life in the government. I'll say a few things, just some stories about when he was a young man. His father died, and he was placed in the care of his grandfather some distance away. He went to college with the Tagore family. He was from an aristocratic family and mixed with that circle of people. And when he graduated, some relative, a friend of his father, gave him an office job. He gave him the manager of some business. And one of his first acts was he was checking the accounts and he saw that somebody was overcharged. So he met the person and gave the money back. And the person in charge of the company said, "I think you have the wrong job. You can't do that kind of thing here. You should maybe become a teacher or, something like that. Some mode of goodness profession." So there was a bit of a struggle, and he eventually ended up in a judicial position, appointed judicial position. It wasn't elected. And one of the places he went, he was transferred. Part of the system is to avoid corruption. The judges were sent from place to place. They didn't stay too long in one place. So one of the places he went to, it was known that the people in that area, they were worshiping a ghost in a tree because they were afraid of the ghost. So they made offerings to the ghost in the tree so the ghost would leave them alone. And Bhaktivinoda was very disturbed by that ghost worship. So he, out of his own pocket, he made a donation to a Brahmin and asked him, just sit underneath this tree and read Srimad Bhagavatam for 6 hours a day. Just read it aloud. And the man did that. And at the end, when he reached the final verse of the entire 18,000 Srimad Bhagavatam verses, it was heard that a branch from the upper part of the tree broke, and a voice from the sky came saying, thanking Bhaktivinoda Thakur for having the Bhagavatam recited, because that liberated the ghost from that curse of becoming a ghost, inhabiting the tree. And the ghost worship was over just by his faith in reading Srimad Bhagavatam aloud. He had great faith, and he had great courage. There's a nice story I'll narrate. There's a longer version, but a shorter version is his posting in Puri was with the recognition that he was very strong and fearless. So the British had a problem. There was a fellow who was a mystic yogi whose name was Bhishika Sen, and he lived outside of Puri with his little followers, and he was very vocal about destroying the British government. But he was a very popular person, so the British government didn't want to mess. So they had a local person do the mess. And that was one of his assignments, deal with this Bhikshuk Hussain. So while he was in Puri, it became known that Bhikshuk Hussain was inviting ladies, aristocratic ladies, to come hear him speak, and he would come speak on different things, and one of the things was rasa dance, and then he would perform rasa dance and flute the ladies, and they'd come back home. And so, the aristocratic men were up in arms. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted to bring him to court. The police wouldn't go because they were afraid, because the man had powers. I mean, one of his powers was he could make fire come out of his hair. And he was saying things like, I'm Mahavishnu, and this is my brother Balaram, and, he could say anything and do anything. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur went himself, followed by some constables, and he confronted Bhikshuk Hussain and said, I hear that you have these intentions against the British government. Could you confirm, is it true? And he spoke very directly, British government's bad and I'm going to destroy them all. And then he said, well, what about these behaviors with the ladies in Puri? And he said, I'm the personality of Godhead, and they're my mind to enjoy, something like that. So Bhaktivinoda said, you come with me, we're going to bring you to trial in Puri. And the man shook his hair, because he had big long locks, whatever you call it, and fire started coming out, and the constables backed off, and Bhaktivinoda personally grabbed him by the arm, fearless. And Bhikshuk Hussain then said, this is my Leela, I'll go with you. So he went to Puri, he was put in jail, waiting for his trial. And he then started threatening Bhaktivinoda Thakur's family. And one of his daughters, you saw the picture, he had a couple of daughters, came down with an intense fever. And his wife, bless her heart, said, it isn't worth it for the life of our daughter to put this person in jail and punish him, and just, let him go free, save the life of our daughter. And he said, no, this man is a rascal, and he needs to be brought to task for all of his misdeeds. So Bhaktivinoda made some arrangement, knowing what to do when someone has fever, and the fever subsided. It was something like 7 days period. And then he cursed Bhaktivinoda, and Bhaktivinoda also started becoming feverish. There was a trial, and Bhaktivinoda was writing the sentence, the conclusion, with his arm shaking because he was feverish. And that this sentence was pronounced. He was put in jail for some period of time. And as they were taking him out of the courtroom, Bhaktivinoda arranged that they would cut his hair, because it's understood yogis keep power in their hair. I don't know how they do that, but and then he fainted right there in the courtroom. And after some days, he died. He went on a starvation fast and died, or something like that. But he, fearless, with wrongdoers. But another part of his character was he was known to be very magnanimous and charitable. I mean, householders are supposed to be charitable, and he was an ideal householder. And as busy as he was with his writing and other things, people would come to see him during that appointed time, and they were never disappointed. It's said about his character. The local British government, after he left Jagannath Puri, assigned somebody to write a biography about him. And these are things that are described about him. He was a very charitable person, highly intellectual. Just to give you some idea, I like talking about Bhaktivinoda, he's wonderful. because there was no printing presses, it wasn't until he was 34 years old that he first got a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam. He got a copy because a friend of his had a friend of his who had a copy, and his friend was willing to have some scribe make a copy of his copy. So then he got Srimad Bhagavatam as a gift, knowing that, that the kind of religious and scholarly person that he was. He read it twice within a short period of time. And then within 1 year, he wrote a book about it. And the book was, I've seen a copy. It's a translation into English. But the people, his audience was educated Indians who had completely bought into the European literature is great and everything Indian is backwards in mythology and, unworthy of consideration. They bought into the propaganda. So addressing that population, he was speaking about the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. It included points saying that any great literature of our modern time, like the European literature of Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained by John Milton. Maybe you don't know anything about those books. John Milton was a British writer, and he wrote 2 books, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and it's just a sequel of the Old Testament of the Bible, but in modern language and that kind of thing. So he used other examples to say great literature has its roots in scripture. And our scripture here in India is this Bhagavad Purana, the chief of all, and went on to describe what's in the Bhagavatam, describing the standards of dharma and proper conduct and the virtues that people should live by and so forth. He was addressing an audience that was not warm and friendly. They were a little, hostile. And he was going against the grain of the intellectuals of his time. But the intellectuals move other people. He knew that he was interested in influencing them. And that's one of the reasons why he published so many books. After some time in Puri, he wanted to he wanted to leave the government service. He put in his request multiple times. It was refused, and finally said, I quit. They said, okay, we'll give you a transfer. And the transfer was, by his choosing, to Krishna Nagar. Now, Krishna Nagar is the current city near the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called Krishna Nagar. And so he, Bhaktivinoda, selected a place to live near Krishna Nagar, but not in the urban center of Krishna Nagar. And so the local leader made a train to go to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house. He was considered such an important person. I'll show you in a minute. This is described a little bit in his autobiography. This is the title of his autobiography, Sva Likita Jivani. It was written as a letter to one of his sons, but it was by him about himself and the different stages of his life and what he went through. The photograph is an actual photograph of him in that place near Krishna Nagar. It's a place that he called Godruma Dweep. We'll see a picture of it in a minute. And while there, he discovered another great contribution. He discovered the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In the backside, in the orange-colored building, that's the little structure that Bhaktivinoda Thakur built. He requested his son, Bhaktisiddhanta, to build this white structure that you see pictured here. What was going on, because he was a magistrate and he had access to government maps and all kinds of reference materials that ordinary people don't necessarily have access to, and scriptures and so forth. He understood that the city of Navadvip, which is on the other side of the Ganga, was a recent city. And the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all the biographies about his life, his residence was on the eastern side of the Ganga. So this new city that's over there, the people were saying was the birthplace of Mahaprabhu, is not the birthplace of Mahaprabhu, deductively. And then scripturally, both the maps, he understood from the maps that shortly after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's disappearance, the Ganga shifted course. And what was his birthplace was now underwater. And it stayed like that for a long time, hundreds of years. And then again, it shifted back. And when it shifted back, around that time is when this new place, Navadvip city, was established and then called the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. But it was not according to the scriptures. It wasn't according to the record of the movements of the Ganges. And he just intuitively didn't accept. So while in the city of Navadvip, and a place on the rooftop, just listen, I'll say this twice, 2 evenings in a row, in a distance, he saw a very, very, very tall building that was luminous. And he was very curious, what's that? Because it's just rice fields over there. But he saw rising tall into the sky, a very, very tall building. And he marked the place, with the other landscape items. And then he saw the same thing. There were others that were with him that saw the same thing. And so he wanted to know what this was. So when he went to the place that looked like where it would have been, there's one area in the agricultural fields that the local Muslim agriculturists couldn't grow anything. They couldn't grow potatoes, they couldn't grow eggplant, they certainly couldn't grow rice. It just wouldn't grow anything except one thing, Tulsi plants. So he said, that's it. That place is the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because it was at the right place. So then he began going door to door in Navadvip, requesting people to give 1 rupee to help him establish the actual birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, it sounds noble, but from my understanding, it was life-risking. Because the livelihood of the people in that town or city depended upon the popularity of that place being understood as the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. And he's going to that same town saying, no, it's not over there, it's over here. They're going to lose their livelihood. You don't do that in Bengal. You'll get harmed. You'll be chopped with a chopper. But he's such a respected person that he did that anyways. And he built a little place, and he asked his son to build a proper, actual large temple, which you see. And when they were digging the foundation, listen to this. In the foundation, they found the deity of Adhoksaja Vishnu that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's father worshipped. It was known in the historical records. Jagannath Mishra worshipped Adhoksaja Vishnu, and they found it in the ground underneath the mud of the Ganges. When the Ganges shifted, there it was. So the actual birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is a very significant achievement historically. This is a photograph of the place that where he made his residence, and just like as I mentioned, right outside is a narrow gauge rail. It's not the standard width of a railroad track. It's the old kind of train that had train tracks that were closer together. And Svananda Sukhada Kunj is the name of the place. On the left side of the picture is where he stayed and where he did his writing and so forth. On the right side, there's a place where he would speak, a covered mandap. And then with the dome area, that's where there was a set of deities, and they're still there today. And persons would come to see him from all over the place. And from this, he chose this place because, another contribution of his in his lifetime, like he had many lifetimes of contributions in one lifetime. So one of those things he did was he established village preaching. He gave it a name, Nama Hata, which means the marketplace of the holy name, Nama Hata. So he patterned it after what Lord Chaitanya's chief associate, Lord Nityananda, did, which was he went from village to village. He found a village leader, and he introduced to the village leader the chanting of the holy name and the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Now, generally the village leader could read and write, but generally the other village people couldn't read or write. And so he had a strategy. The strategy was he composed songs, because Bengali people like to sing. I mean, everybody likes to sing. Bengali people are really good at singing. So he composed songs that tells the story of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. And then he would train the village leader to learn the song and sing the song and then explain the meaning of the song. So he would give Lord Chaitanya's teachings that way. And then using offset printing in Bengali language, he had, a 2-3 page lesson per week that the village leader would give. And it was just in really simple question-answer format, like, who's Krishna? Answer. And who is the living entity? Answer. What's the relationship between the living entity and Krishna? Answer. What does that relationship look like? How is it developed? Answer. Really simple. And then, so some lessons. And then he compiled the lessons in a book and published the book. That became a manual for the thousands of Namahata centers, and our modern terminology is a Bhakti Vriksha group. But the previous nomenclature was Namahata group. It was just a different nomenclature, same model. And, widely throughout Bengal, because that was a service that was given by Lord Chaitanya to Lord Nityananda, who he did all over Bengal. So he was just following in his footsteps. And the headquarters that Lord Nityananda established was this place. And there's more to be said, but it's already 6:17, and I want to give some time for some questions. Another great contribution that he made was, as you see here, this is a current projected image of what the temple of Vedic Planetarium will look like. Have you seen this image before? No? No? You've heard of the temple of Vedic Planetarium? No. Some of you have. You heard about it? Okay. Let me give you an idea of what it is. The seed of the idea is Bhaktivinoda. Because Bhaktivinoda explains that in the Adi Purana, there's a description, in the holy land of Navadvip, a great temple will be established, and very, very tall and brilliant, and describes it. So based on that authoritative statement that it will exist sometime in the future, Bhaktivinoda he passed that idea on to his son. His son passed that idea on to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada then gave detailed explanation of what that would look like. But he didn't just call it a temple. Prabhupada called it a very interesting name, Temple of Vedic Planetarium. You ever heard such a thing before? I haven't. It's uncommon. But a planetarium is a place where you go to see what the structure of the universe is. And the Vedic planetarium is meant to give a three-dimensional depiction of what Srimad Bhagavatam says about Vedic cosmology. Now, primarily Srimad Bhagavatam, also Vishnu Purana, and to some degree Mahabharata, gives references to how the universe is structured. Because two things. When the British were really against the Vedas, they said, there was some names, and rather than say the names, it was propagated all over Europe that the Vedas are primitive and mythology, and there are some two portions of the Vedas that are empirical, and one is cosmology, because it gives numbers of the distances and diameters and all kinds of empirical data in the fifth canto Bhagavatam. So the statement was made that these two things, anthropology, the history of the dating of man's activities and those kinds of things, as anthropology develops, will show it's all rubbish, and as astronomy develops, will show it's all rubbish. It was a claim. So, interestingly, the Vedic cosmology and modern cosmology are getting closer. Vedic cosmology isn't changing. Modern cosmology is evolving. It is getting closer and closer and closer to the numbers of, like, the distance between the Earth and the Sun. I won't go. I could go into it. It's interesting, but it's time consuming and it may make your head spin because of all the details. But Prabhupada wanted, the principle is, he wanted people that were scholarly, and even people that were skeptical, and people from India that kind of have lost connection with their culture and the teachings of their culture, to see it in three-dimensional depiction. This is what the Vedas say about the structure of the universe. And it includes, pardon me while I use my hands, a chandelier. You know what a chandelier is, right? Yes? A chandelier, that at the top part of the chandelier is Dhruvaloka, and the planets below Dhruvaloka, that's Bhuvar and Svargaloka, they're moving in a clockwise direction, vertical below, but in a clockwise direction beneath the pole star. And then there's planets above Dhruvaloka, Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Brahmaloka, and then the planetarium takes you into Haridam and Golokadam. And it depicts the planets below, the 7 lower planetary systems. The whole 14 planetary systems depicted in the planetarium according to the explanation of the Bhagavatam. And it's literally the structure of the universe, and it's not easy to understand it. What to speak of getting technology in India that you actually have part of it that's moving. That's a challenging part. Understanding it is a challenging part, and getting a planetarium that moves is another challenging part. And to develop this, it's taken maybe 20 years, the plan of the planetarium. But that's just there's 3 domes. It's one of the ones on the left or the right. The central dome is Radha Madhava, and the Lord Chaitanya and his associates, the Panchatattva, and then the disciplic succession. So without going into it, I could show you pictures of what the altar in the center is going to look like. Over to the right, that's Lord Nrsingadev. And over to the left, that's the planetarium. So what he wanted, it was a strategy. Restore faith in the Vedic wisdom, in empirical data that answers the challenge of the European scholars that's saying it's rubbish. It's not rubbish. It's more accurate and very, very precise, Vedic cosmology. But so let people come and check it out. And when they come to check it out, they'll get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya just by coming to the holy abode of Lord Chaitanya, whether they know it or not. They're going to enter the abode of Lord Chaitanya and get Lord Chaitanya's mercy. That was the strategy. And that's something, the seed of that strategy came from Bhaktivinoda. He said there will be this temple, it's from the scriptures. He passed it on to his son. You see there's a screen right here? Welcome. Hare Krishna. You came just at the time for questions and answers. Okay, so here's our last slide. This is an image of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And there are other contributions, but I think I've more than used my time. And we're honoring, the whole of the Hare Krishna movement had its root in his vision. His vision was the vision of Lord Chaitanya that said, one day the chanting of the holy name will be heard in every town and village in the world. That's a lot of places. So to make that happen, there has to be some system, some structure. So one of the things that Bhaktivinoda Thakur did was, in the English language, at his own expense, he put together an 86-page life and precepts of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. First half was his life, second half is his teachings. And then distributed it to libraries free of charge, just sent them to put in their libraries so educated people can begin to know. He wanted that. He passed it on to his son, who passed it on to his followers, and here we are. The fruit of the seed of this visionary, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, to have the teachings of Lord Chaitanya all over the world, and the holy name chanted all over the world. And it's not easy to achieve that. There's cultural, there's language, there's government, there's lots of obstacles. But the wish, the will of the personality of Godhead has carried Bhaktivinoda and his son Bhaktisiddhanta and Prabhupada and his followers. So here we are. We owe being at the feet of Radha Krishna and chanting the holy name and hearing these essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya largely to Bhaktivinoda at a time when there was a lot of opposition to that idea, that notion. It was poo-pooed by everybody. But he had deep faith and great spiritual strength, a lot of vision, tireless. I mean, I don't know who can sleep 2.5 to 3 hours every day and function properly, but he did. 10 children. Government service with social obligations because of that government service. Great personality. So we're honoring his appearance day today. So let's see if there's some discussion. Maybe because you're being introduced to this personality, it's not so easy. But let's see if there's some thoughts you'd like to share or hear something about him. Yeah. Do we have a microphone?
Maharaj, you were telling about the different moods, Gauranitai and Gaur Gadadhar.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you please elaborate on what is the difference of the mood? just trying to understand why that worship has been done.
Lord Nityananda's function was assisting Lord Chaitanya in bringing the holy name to the people throughout the land. Propagating the holy name, the mission of propagating the holy name. From Navadvip during their childhood, after Lord Chaitanya accepted sannyas and lived in Puri, he gave Nityananda the assignment, take the holy name with these followers and distribute it throughout the land. So that's the mode of Gaura-Nitai worship. The mode of Lord Nityananda, and the mode of the worship of Gaura-Nitai. And Gadadhar is his mood. Well, let's put it this way, just to keep it simple. It's more along the Raganuga Bhakti mood, or the Raga mood, or the sweetness of relishing the mellows of Krishna's pastimes, as he was very expert at reciting Srimad Bhagavatam and worshipping the deity of Radha Gopinath. So that mood of Gadadhar is nourished by Gaur Gadadhar worship. That was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's mood, his personal deity. Okay? Anyone else in the room? Because if not, we'll go to some online questions. You have something else. Go ahead.
Maharaj, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had 10 children.
10.
And then he still did a lot. So having 1 or 2 or 3, it's very, very difficult today. Is it because of the timelines there? In his time, situations were different, or is it because I'm not determined so, or I'm not qualified so? Where is lacking, or is an empowered personality?
Probably all of the above and more. I mean, in the photograph, we'll go back to the photograph. It looks to me like behind him and his wife, there's 2 assistants, ladies. And they were probably, very much involved in taking care of the needs of the family members. He was an aristocratic person and had servants, or, somebody, whatever the language was used at the time, someone to assist him in practical matters. And, extended family kinds of connections, it makes it, it's a little more complex. And on the other hand, it makes it a little easier because it wasn't just, him and the kids. There were a lot of other people involved. And, it's part of his greatness. And so that's part of his empowerment. He would, obviously, when he did things effectively, and he did them swiftly. So for you, for anybody to do anything that we do, it takes longer to do those things. And he just did with such quality and such presence that the effect was accomplished in less time. But that's the empowerment factor. So put all those things together, and he was able to do what he did.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
One last one. Not directly related to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but in general, Anartha Nivrutti stage is very, very long for a conditioned soul. And to get into a stage of Nishtha, is there any practical steps, tricks or tips? Because for me, I see it's a long way, but how to progress? Where am I lacking or missing anything, or any tricks or tips?
Can we come back to this question? Because I like to stay focused on our topic. We'll come back.
Thank you.
Put it in the parking lot. We'll come back. Okay, let's hear.
How was Bhaktivinoda Thakur able to maintain such a punctual and rigorous routine? And what are some practical tips to do the same in today?
What are some practical tips to follow, to take his example? Is that your question? To read, I printed it out so I could read it to you all, because my assumption is all of us cannot do what he did. And, not only the number of things, but, the degree of regulation. It wasn't just notional. He was very punctual. He'd look at his pocket watch and he'd move on to the next thing. So something that I can share, that I've understood about time management, is it's important to allot that there are a number of functions and roles each of us have to play. At different stages of life it changes, but there's multiple. So you allot some time for each of those things that's important to you. And during that period of time, you're totally focused. Like when you're chanting, you're totally focused. You're not thinking about the next thing or, the yesterday's thing. You're thinking about, you're very present with what you're doing at the moment. And then the next thing, and you're very focused and present. You move on to the next thing. Compartmentalized perhaps is one way to describe, but being very focused and allotting, I use the phrase blocks of time. So you set blocks of time for different things, and you do those things in a regulated manner, and that increases the mode of goodness by regulation, and you're not skipping something that's important. You have to allow some flexibility, some discretionary time. Sometimes something unexpected comes up, and you have to invest time because it's important and it's pressing. So you have to have some discretionary blocks of time. And if there isn't something pressing, then you have a project that you're working on. So there's lessons in how he manages time for us, lessons for us in the blocks of time and moving seamlessly from one thing to the next thing, not overindulging in one thing and then, I didn't take care of something that's important to me. I didn't cook, or I didn't take care of the kids, or I didn't chant, or I didn't read, and I happen to read it, and so you get into that spin. So blocks of time. And you practice at blocks of time, and it becomes a pattern of your life. It becomes easier to do it when you become in the mode of goodness and regulated than if you're not in the mode of goodness and unregulated. So it's moving your life in that direction. He was very productive, had many different roles, and he had blocks of time for them. That's a principle to live by. That's something we can learn.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Online, any? Yes? Can you give him the microphone?
This question from Ashish Prabhu. Was the vision of Gaudiya Math also an idea by Bhaktivinoda Thakur and implemented by Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur?
Not in name, but in principle. He, Bhaktivinoda, called it, and his son also called it, Vaishnava Vishva Raja Sabha. So then it became Gaudiya Math. But when he was a young boy, Bhaktivinoda used that, Bhakti Siddhanta used that term, which he had heard from his father. And then it became Gaudiya Math. Then they established temples under that name.
This question from, I think, Hari Prabhu from Boston. When you hear the life of a personality such as Bhaktivinoda Thakur and others, I feel more attracted to such life of pure devotion more than sometimes reading actual Shastra. Is that appropriate? If not, what should be our mood? Is there a reason why lives of devotees are more inspiring than the scriptures itself?
Well, it's two things. There's the human interest side. Here's an outstanding personality. He's even, reasonably contemporary. It's not just like a storybook. Dhruva went to Dhruvaloka or something like that. This is recent times with a real, person that here's a photograph of him and his family. So it's relatable. It's personal. It's in literature. It's called the human interest dimension. But that's there in the Bhagavatam also, or our scriptures. It's just we don't have the sensitivity or the purity to appreciate. Therefore, if we can appreciate and read together in the association of devotees and hear commentary by Prabhupada and other great acharyas, it helps it come to life. You can feel the presence of that great personality when you hear in the proper mood. So I think it's those two things. The human interest of someone that's more accessible in timeline and, features and characteristics and lifestyle and so forth. The human interest factor. And also how we read the scripture, how we read the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. I'll say the second part in a different way. There's one devotee who I appreciate very much. They shared with me, I'm having trouble reading Bhagavad Gita because my mind just wanders practically as soon as I begin reading Bhagavad Gita. And I know that that's not right. What should I do? So my advice was, before you open the book, you bring your mind to Krishna and say to yourself, Krishna wants to speak to me. I want to hear Krishna speaking to me. It's not just a book, it's Krishna speaking to me. Then open the page and read with your heart oriented in that way and see what your experience is. And it was, it was a wow response. Krishna spoke to me. And this is what I felt when I felt Krishna speaking to me. And it was really right on. And when I started to adjust things according to what Krishna was saying, it was another wow. So now I know how to read Bhagavad Gita. It's not, we're used to information gathering kind of reading, and it's not. It's personal and warm and emotion filled and relationship building. So read in that way. That will help.
This question is from Sanchari. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a High Court magistrate who held a lot of importance in British circles because he lived in Calcutta in the height of British Raj. Have you ever heard if Queen Victoria or any members of the higher British society came across his work, both with his career as well as his writings?
It may be, but I've not read anything. I can't say.
Do you know of any members of Bhaktivinoda Thakur still alive?
No, I don't. There may be, but I don't know about it. I can't say.
I had a curiosity question, Maharaj. Is there a weekend schedule that we have of Bhaktivinoda Thakur? Like a weekday, he goes to court and comes back. On a Sunday, is there any schedule?
We know about his weekday schedule, but his son didn't write about his weekend schedule. Something we know, whether it was weekend or weekday, it's not said, but something that he did was, there's a celebrated place that is well known during Jagannath Rath Yatra, a place called Jagannath Ballabh Gardens. Jagannath Ballabh Gardens is a place where the Rath Yatra cart stops, and people, they're invited to directly bring items for offering to Jagannath, place on the cart, and they make the offerings. People just from their homes, they bring things and place on this giant platform of the cart, and it gets offered. So that's a traditional event in the Rath Yatra. And then nearby is the Jagannath Ballabh Gardens. So it's a place where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would perform pastimes. And in those gardens, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would recite Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, his schedule sounded packed, so maybe he did it on weekends. But he had a large gathering. There's another story about that. Okay? Anyone else? That's it? Okay.
One last question.
Okay. He's on.
So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur.
Can you speak into the microphone? Thanks.
Yeah. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when his son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, got initiated, so for his initiation or for his progress in the spiritual life, if I remember correctly, he advises his son to take initiation from
Gaur Kishore, yes.
Right. Is what's his thought process? I mean,
The
what's
thought,
in his mind?
It's part of the culture that the father doesn't give diksha to the son.
Okay.
So he didn't.
Okay.
He gave him, when he was a little boy, he gave him a deity and he gave him a mantra, but it wasn't mantra diksha. And through his life he worshipped and chanted that mantra, but it wasn't formal mantra diksha.
Okay.
Because that's to be done not by father, but someone.
Okay.
So he recommended to someone. Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay. Okay. I think we're finished. Prabhupada ki jai. And now it's time for...
Yes, Maharaj.
Do I hear a crying child in the background?
It's not 10.
Okay. So we're completed for this evening. And you can do the wrap-up if you'd like.
Sure. I want to thank you very much, Maharaj, for illuminating this personality in our line on his appearance day. So thank you so much for treating us to a very special Sunday Peace program. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Prabhupada ki jai. Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai.